In John chapter 18, we first read that after Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am." And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, "I am," they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I have told you that I am. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way." That the saying might be fulfilled which he had spoken, "Of those whom you gave me, I have lost none." Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?" My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share John chapter 18. They are seeking a man, Jesus, a Jew from a poor village of Nazareth, and in their mind they are using his status as part of the justification. For those who have no reputation have little status before the law. But Jesus responds to their request, first of all initiating the conversation with them and declaring, "I am." And incredibly, these people back off and fall to the ground when Jesus makes this statement. It seems these people who are arresting Jesus are not a formal military cohort led by a centurion. They are a rabble of thugs that the chief priest has put together to go with Judas to bring in this man. It's more a gang than a detachment of soldiers. He is Jesus of Nazareth, but he has used a form of expression which declares he is God as a man, and they don't quite know how to respond to that. After the second round, Judas steps forward and gives Jesus a kiss to formally identify him, and those with Judas begin to arrest him. But Peter draws out his sword to defend his master. Jesus tells him, "Put the sword away, Peter," for Jesus is concerned that the disciples should be protected that night. If Peter has injured a person, then he too will be arrested, and his arrest will detract from Jesus' own arrest. So Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? And Jesus reaches out and heals Malchus' ear. Consequently, there is absolutely no basis on which Peter can be charged for this event, because there is no damage to the ear. This, in fact, is a picture of what Jesus will do for all of us. For when we stand before God, there will be absolutely no evidence against us, because Jesus will have restored all the damage our sins have done. We continue. Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered, "I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet. And in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said." And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" And Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. And may the Lord bless these further words to us. The political situation was that Caiaphas was the high priest that year. Annas was his father-in-law and the former high priest. Caiaphas had married Annas' daughter, and so Annas was a man of high status. And this is where they first took Jesus, to Annas' palace. But John slips in the words, it was Caiaphas, formerly the high priest, who had said to the Jews, after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, that it was expedient that one man should die for the people, rather than that the people die. Because he imagined that if the people acclaimed Jesus as the Messiah, the Romans would come down on them like a ton of bricks. And Jesus had no way of fighting the Romans. He had no soldiers. He had no weapons. But because of the popularity of Jesus, the calm relations that they had cultivated with the Romans would be destroyed. So this man has no hope in the Messiah, and has no hope in God, and has no trust in Jesus the Messiah. He just sees him as a troublemaker. And so he would solve the problem of Jesus by taking out one man. That's why he's not worried about arresting the disciples. He senses that all the trouble is because of this one man, Jesus. Consequently, Peter and John were able to follow the detachment. Those who arrested Jesus were not interested in them. And indeed, John, who was known to the high priest and the high priestly family, is able to come into the courtyard of the high priest's palace, being known by the person who was at the gate. And he saw Peter standing outside, and so he went to the girl at the gate and brought Peter in. So now we have two disciples. One is observing what's going on, but the other is thinking, how can I rescue Jesus out of this situation? The girl who opened the door and kept the gate said to Peter, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" For she knew that John was a disciple, and John was bringing Peter in. Why was John bringing Peter in? Was Peter also one of them? But Peter says, "I am not." Well, cold in the middle of the night. Caiaphas has a lot of organising to do if he's going to get Jesus formally charged, condemned, and to be executed the next day. So there is a lot of standing around, and the night is cold, it being early spring. And so there's a fire of coals. And Peter has stood with those who are gathered around the fire to warm himself. But Jesus has been taken before Annas the high priest. And Annas takes the opportunity to quiz Jesus himself about his disciples and about his teaching.